This devastating super tank from Germany shocked the Russians. The Leopard 2 is a third-generation main battle tank that Krasmaffei first created for the West German Army in the 1970s. The Leopard 1 main combat tank of the West German Army was replaced by the tank when it first entered service in 1979. It is propelled by a V12 twin-turbo diesel engine and equipped with a 120mm smoothbore cannon. A number of non-European countries, including Canada, Chile, Indonesia, and Singapore, as well as Germany and 13 other European countries' armed services, have used various variants. The Leopard 2 saw service in Syria with the Turkish Armed Forces and in Kosovo with the German Army. It also saw duty in Afghanistan with the Dutch, Danish, and Canadian deployments to the International Security Assistance Force. The tank comes in two major development batches. The first models up to the Leopard 2 a 4-feature vertically facing turret armor, and the upgraded batch, which includes the Leopard 2 a 5 in subsequent variants, has angled arrow-shaped turret applique armor, as well as other enhancements. All variants are equipped with superior night vision and sighting technology, fully stabilized main guns, coaxial machine guns, computerized fire control systems with laser rangefinders, and other features. First vehicles used a low-light level TV system, or LLTV. Thermal imaging was introduced later on. The tank can attack moving targets while traversing unforgiving terrain. The German military was eager to create a better tank in the next 10 years, even while the Leopard 1 was only beginning service. As a consequence, in 1963, work to create the MBT-70 in partnership with the United States began. However, it started to become doubtful in 1967 as to when the MBT-70 would really go into service. As a result, in 1967, the German government gave Porsche permission to investigate potential upgrades for the Leopard 1. The goal of this project, which went by the moniker Vergoldeter Leopard, Gilded Leopard, was to incorporate cutting-edge technology into the Leopard design. An autoloader, a coaxial autocannon, and an independent commander's periscope were added by the anticipated improvements. A TV security camera was attached on an extensible tower, and the anti-air machine gun could be fired from within the car. Cast steel armor was used to optimize the turret and hull's design, while the suspension, gearbox, and engine exhaust vents were all modified. The tanner that surprised Russia. The Cold War era's most sophisticated tank, the Leopard 2, was intended to be. Nobody could have predicted the conclusion of the Cold War. Still, it did. Achieving parity with the USSR was no longer necessary for the Europeans. As a consequence, since the commencement of manufacturing, around 3,600 units have been created. As it turns out, Leopard 2 is still the greatest in the 21st century. As a result, it continues to be created, and older changes are drastically changing. The recent success of the Ukrainian army in eastern Ukraine astonished both Russian and Western forces, notably the German government, who had little expectation of such a quick advance by Ukrainian forces. Russia, the so-called military superpower, was pitted against Ukrainian troops who have been appealing with the West for supplies so they can continue fighting for months. Russia has a limitless supply of firearms, tanks, and fighter aircraft. On the battlefield, momentum. The German government is being urged once again and urgently to supply cutting-edge Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. Kiev intends to exploit the advantage it has over the Russian invaders to push them back as far as it can. Additional territory gains would be a crucial negotiating point in discussions with Moscow on a potential ceasefire. The German government is reluctant to provide Ukraine with weaponry, as it has often done in recent months. Berlin seems to be torn. Government representatives pledged that Germany will support Ukraine without conditions. When pressed to clarify unequivocally whether Germany should provide the Leopard 2 tanks, these same lawmakers evade. The distance between rhetoric and actual action is often quite large. Partners in the German coalition at odds. While the Free Democrats, FDP, and Greens support arming Ukraine with heavy weaponry, including contemporary Western tanks, it is true that the Chancellor and the Social Democratic Party, SPD, in particular, are playing it safe. as the situation on the battlefield might soon change. Kiev has little compassion for the disagreement inside the German coalition government. Nobody knows whether German tanks will still act as a deterrent to Russian aggressors in a few months, as they will in the coming weeks. Once again, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is being cautious. He claims that he first wants to coordinate the supply of Leopard 2 tanks, in particular, with the US, France, and the UK, and that second, he does not want to fully sever negotiations with the Kremlin despite the military sales to Kyiv. Third, the chief of state of Germany worries that Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, would deploy tactical nuclear weapons to avert an impending military loss. The West wants the crisis to be resolved politically so that Moscow and all other sides can agree on it. A chance for the West. Politicians seldom get their way when it comes to how conflicts play out, as Russian President Putin has discovered the last several months the hard way. He believed his alleged special operation would only take a few days at most weeks and would give him a resounding triumph back in February. It turns out that he could not have more effectively exposed the military ineptness and low morale of the Russian forces to the world. A military loss would put his authority in danger. That is an opportunity, not a danger, for the West. Putin does not often behave irrationally. Only when opponents confront him forcefully does he appreciate them. He takes advantage of people's weaknesses, notably the division in the West. Therefore, the Western allies don't have weeks to come to an agreement on the shipment of contemporary tanks to Ukraine. They must act quickly within a few days. Putin's openness to meaningful discussions would be substantially increased by such a move. Another illustration of Western unanimity. Height and width. In the interview, von der Leyen discussed changing the breadth over depth principle that guided an overhaul of the armed forces 5 years prior. He claimed that while Germany needed an appropriate breadth of capability to carry out its military obligations, it just as urgently needed more depth and staying power. The crisis of 2014, she added, alluding to Russia's suspected military engagement in the pro-Moscow separatist uprising in neighboring Ukraine, have visibly affected the security environment. We need to provide the Army with fresh, truthful answers to the questions of what it needs and what it doesn't require from us. Von der Leyen questioned, among other things, the restrictions on heavy weapon systems put in place by her predecessor, Thomas de Maizière, who is now the Interior Minister and, like her, is a member of Chancellor Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats. For instance, she remarked, as a starting step, "We wish to stop the habit of giving away or discarding valuable excess stuff. For example, Leopard 2. De Maizière intended to cut the number of Leopard 2 battle tanks deployed by Germany from 350 to 225. Germany's initiatives to improve the adaptability and capabilities of its armed forces coincide with NATO's increased expectations for its members to quicken their response times. The military alliance demanded in September the establishment of a new quick reaction force located in Eastern Europe, with the German Bundeswehr playing a significant role in response to Russia's activities in Ukraine. Additional military commitments for Germany include training activities in Afghanistan and Iraq. Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg, who was the defense minister at the time, initiated a reform of the Bundeswehr in 2010, and de Maizière carried it through in part. Abolishing mandatory military service and lowering force levels from 250,000 to 185,000 were two of the reform initiatives.